Hey, I'm Jason with 3D Printing Canada, and I feel like a kid on Christmas because our friends at TEVO contacted us and decided to send us a TEVO Tornado. All right, let's start unboxing this. The TEVO Tornado is a very similar format to something like the CR10. It's very similar in build volume, and much of its construction is the same. I'll point out some of the differences as I come across it. I've never actually seen one of these in person, so this will be a first for me. Right off the top, we have the assembly manual. I'm curious to see what that looks like. I understand it's extremely detailed when you compare it to something like the Creality manual, which I mentioned in our Creality unboxing video is very lackluster. It's extremely well packed, as you would hope. The control box is a lot smaller. It's maybe a little bit wider, but definitely a lot shallower in depth than the CR10. Assembly tools. These are two T-brackets. Those are to help support the Z uprights. They are, looks like aluminum. Anyway, they're not plastic as they are on some other models. It looks like we have to assemble the bed ourselves. Usually the bed is attached to the undercarriage, like out of the box, like on the CR10. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I know sometimes beds can get damaged in shipping, so maybe it's easier for them to make sure that doesn't happen if they're in two separate pieces. We have a scraper with a wood handle, a 512 meg SD card. Interesting to note, it is a full-size SD card and not a micro. A little small though. Bowden tube or PTFE tubing. USB cable, and it's not a micro USB, or rather a mini like the CR10. And the upright. Oh boy. All right, the whole thing's coming out. Go. So right away, we have a Titan style extruder, which is using E3D's open source design. That's a lot better than the kind of direct extruder you see on something like a CR10. I think it's a 3:1 gear ratio on that. All right. The bed, the heated bed seems to be attached to the undercarriage, so I'm gonna need snips. Just with a zip tie. There we go. All right, so here is the heated bed, and they've even left the test print from the factory on the bed to show you them basically utilizing the whole build surface. It is an AC heated bed, so that differs significantly from many other printers. Instead of it being 12 or 24 volt DC, we actually have a 120 volt AC heated bed. It's like a silicone style heater with some insulation foam, which is foil backed. This feels really nice. The top build surface is some sort of glass or ceramic. Maybe we'll read more about that in the manual. And then they have a build tack-esque top surface. I'm interested to know what that's made of. And it's got a bit of a texture to that build surface. And then the base of the unit. It's very well packed. Holy moly. This. Okay, so there's the base. All right, first things first, I'm gonna admit defeat right off the bat, and I'm gonna give the manual a quick browse. Okay, the first thing they tell me to do is assemble the gantry, the vertical gantry, the uprights here, to the base frame. I'm actually going to deal with the base frame a little bit, the y-axis, and specifically the wheels underneath it. It's rather loose, I can wiggle it around already. But what I'd like to mention is this manual. I've heard that this manual is pretty good, and I'm impressed when you compare it to others, other printers of the same style. This has very detailed assembly drawings and very well-written English instructions. This is where I found that the first thing they tell you to do is assemble this to here. I'll refer to that if I need to in a little bit. The base here, as I said, is anodized green to match the rest and is rather loose. So on the bottom here, you've got 6 wheels, and 3 of them have eccentric nuts on them that can be adjusted to increase the tension against the rail so that we don't have it wobbling like this as it moves forward and backwards. This is probably easier to do at this stage rather than assembling the entire printer and having to tip it on its side or reach underneath. I'll try to do this so you can see. So the eccentric nuts are on these ones at the top, and what I'm going to do is adjust them so that as I move each wheel with my hand, they don't slip, they grip and move the entire bed back and forth. It's a little tricky to figure out which way actually tightens and loosens. I mean, eventually both directions will work if you turn it far enough. There we go, starting to get some traction, a little bit more. Okay, so now you can see, unlike before, if I rotate the wheels, they're gripping the frame just enough. See, this one's still maybe a little bit loose. So I'll tighten this just a tad bit more. There we go. And what we'll do is we'll come back to it after we've tightened all 6. Okay. At this point, we have no more slop in the bed. Moves nice and smooth forward and back. You also want to make sure that you don't feel any kind of detents, like you shouldn't feel dun, 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 as you move it forward. That can be an indication that you either have a flat spot on a wheel, a bad bearing, or your wheels are just simply too tight. There's too much force against the rail. So that moves with very little resistance forward and backwards, other than the drag from the stepper motor. So that's good. Now we're going to need our springs. I'm glad to see that they have the flat springs as opposed to kind of your typical spring. These tend to bind less as you tighten them down and don't kind of bulge out to one side. And then we'll need the nuts for the bottom. Like other printers, I'll probably find these rather difficult to grab onto, so there are aftermarket nuts that you could put on, or you can just simply print adjustment wheels, leveling wheels to replace those. And so we need obviously 1 spring for each corner, 1 bolt for each corner, and we're going to orient this so that the cable comes out the back corner, which would be the left side if you're looking at it from the front, so it's going to go like that, more or less. Make sure that that's right. There are no instructions in the manual as far as assembling the bed goes. Not that I could see anyway in a quick browse there. I just wanted to make sure that these bolts are meant to stick out the top of the bed like that. Often they're kind of underneath your build surface, so I was curious if this peels up, but it seems to be bonded very well to the base. Another thing that I noticed right away when I was looking at the control box is it's labeled for AC 110 volt. The bed is also labeled for the voltage, so that will be labeled according to what voltage you use around the world. Other control boxes, something like on the Creality, have a switch to select the voltage. There is no such switch on these. So rather than using an auto-selecting power supply, it looks like they have specific ones for the different voltages. So the bed on here is rectangular, it's not square, so it's a little bit bigger than the published build volume, but most of it is probably not going to be usable. Most of the extra, I mean, is not going to be usable print volume because of the way that the bolts come through the top. Among other factors, there may not be enough travel in the Y axis to make use of the front and back sections of the print surface. And I need an Allen wrench. Okay. Just tighten these enough that they don't wiggle loose as we make our way through the build. And we'll come back and adjust this later as we get the hot end moved down towards the bed. We'll need to do a quick leveling routine. I'll take the scraper at this point and just peel off this factory print. This factory print just demonstrates obviously that the printer works, but also that the bed is level all the way through. It actually looks a little bit thin in the center, so there may be a little bit of a hump in the center of the bed. We'll have to see. Wow, it's really stuck on there. Okay, we'll clean the rest of that off in a sec. Now let's get the uprights attached. One of the reasons I was having such a difficult time getting the print off the bed is the scraper, which is not this one, that they include is completely dull. There's no sharpened edge on that scraper, so that's basically going to be useless to you until you sharpen it. That is one thing that I forgot reading about in the past. So now we're going to assemble the uprights to the base frame. We're going to use 4 M5 by 25 bolts. They're a little bit shorter than I expected, but I'm sure they'll do the job. There's about a centimeter of bite into the upright. And then when we're done that, we're going to attach these corner braces, these T-braces. You want to assemble the upright so that the Titan extruder is on the same side as where the bed cable comes out of. So if you're facing the front of the printer, that is the left side. And much like the CR10, the easiest way that I've found to do this is hang one side off the table and put these underneath. Let's move this like this. So you have 2 different T-brackets. One of them has the Z-limit switch. We're going to put the Z-limit switch on the same side as the extruder and the X-axis motor, so that would be over here. And it's just got standard T-nuts. Make sure that they're all vertical. Slide it in the channel, and then I find kind of backing them off to make sure they're really loose and then giving it a quick twist helps to make sure that the T-nuts are engaged in the channel. Most of them you can see. You can see these two bottom ones and this top one, but this one you can't really tell. So this bracket is some sort of injection molded plastic. It's not metal. So these two, you don't want to compress them too hard. The rest of them, snug them right down. And then on this side, for whatever reason, there are no T-nuts attached. So slide the remaining nuts through, or bolts through, rather. Should have done them one at a time. And then loosely thread on the T-nuts. And make sure that the T-nuts are threaded on the appropriate direction, if you will. We'll take a picture of that and show you up here. I've actually come across machines where the T-nuts are installed upside down and they really don't bite well or work at all in that case. Sometimes they don't even spin in the extrusion, so they'll never engage the channel like they should. Okay. And now the same thing on the other side, just without the limit switch this time. That last one there didn't want to engage. The T-nut wasn't rotating, so I reached in and just kind of pressed it around the corner. But that's what I mean by the ones in the center, you can't really tell for certain if they've engaged or not. All right, the T-nuts are attached, or sorry, the T-brackets are attached. We've got two cords, one for the hot end, one for the heated bed, and now we're ready to start connecting the control box. We flipped the unit around so you can see what I'm doing. The first thing that we're going to do is connect the large cables. The bed cable has 4 pins. So it goes in this one. There's a little groove to orient the aircraft connector, I believe they're called. Screw that one in. And then for the hot end, it has 8 pins, I think. Yeah, same thing, screw that thing in. There we go. Okay, then we'll make our way through the rest of the cables. They are labeled with these little green tags. So this is the Y limit switch. That's the smaller of the 2 connectors in this bundle, and the Y stepper motor. So the connector for the stepper motor, you can't see it here, but it's on the back side here. And these are keyed, so just make sure it's in the proper orientation. It'll be awfully difficult to plug it in if it's not. And then the limit switch is right on the side of this rail here beside the belt. That one's a little bit trickier. There we go. Now we are left with this bundle here. This is the Z limit switch and the Z motor. So the Z motor is this one on the bottom here, moves the gantry up and down. Connect that. And the Z limit switch, if you remember from earlier, is on the T bracket that we installed on the side. This is going to be a little bit tricky. They really don't give you a whole lot of cable, so I'll move this a little bit closer. That's one thing, same as the CR10, I wish they gave you a little bit more cable length so that you had some more freedom in where you place the control box. I know extension cables are available, but it would be nice to just have an extra couple inches. I really can't move that more than, say, 4 inches away from the printer. This bundle here contains 3 connectors, X-axis motor, X-axis limit switch, and the extruder motor. So the extruder motor is here on the Titan extruder. The X-axis motor is here. little bit tricky to get, there we go. And then the X-axis limit switch is, we'll include a picture up here, is behind the black cover if you're facing the front of the printer. It's hidden from view in this angle. There we go. So right away, I can tell you I'm not a fan of this split loom tubing. I prefer the braided nylon type tubing. They're also not long enough, so you've got wires hanging out of both ends, kind of halfway through the slit. I'll need to make this look a little bit nicer from a cable management perspective. Another thing that is different from the CR10's control box, or other units like it, is the intake fan is on the side instead of on the bottom. That is nice from my opinion, like you get better airflow rather than you would on the bottom, but it could be a problem if you have this up against a wall or something. So make sure that there is adequate airflow in the side of the control box. One of the first things you'll notice when you power up the TEVO is that it's quiet. I don't hear any of the fans running right now, which sometimes can be a bit of a nuisance. I'm excited to see how fast the AC heater heats this bed, but first we got to check the basic mechanics of the printer and make sure that we have everything connected properly. Pressing down the thumb wheel, you'll notice the menu layout is a little bit different than you may have seen in the past. There's custom commands, and within there are items like home, front left, front right, etc. I don't want to home it right away. I've left this bed intentionally high. I haven't really tightened it down. If you home it, as it homes the Z, it may ram the nozzle right into the bed. Probably wouldn't cause any damage, especially if your nozzle wasn't already heated, but it's best to not do that anyway. So let's tighten each of these thumb wheels as much as you're comfortable doing to make sure that there's lots of clearance from the bed to the nozzle, and then we will slowly move the nozzle down to check clearance before we do a regular home. Right away I've noticed that the bolts are spinning as I try to tighten the thumb wheel on the bottom, so I'll have to stick an Allen wrench in them to keep them stationary. Helps if you get the right size. There we go. Another thing that I'll mention while I'm doing this is I noticed that some of the packing materials, some of the foam, this rubbery kind of foam, has gotten caught in the Z-axis lead screw. So you may want to give that a wipe down, and if you end up rubbing off all the grease, you may want to grease it back up. But there are a couple little plasticky chunks there that I'll want to get rid of before they get clogged up in the grease. Okay, so now we've got a little more clearance between the nozzle and the bed. Let's go back into the menu, custom commands, and we will just move the X-axis. So maybe we'll go front left. That's probably going to move the Y and the X. Nope. Let's manually move each of the axes. We should probably have homed that first before we tried that. Prepare, move axis. We'll move the X-axis. We can do 10 millimeters at a time. All right, X is moving both directions. That's good. We'll go, oops, back out. Let's move the Y, 10 millimeters. Y moves forward and backwards. That's good. And then we'll check the Z as well. Now we're just going to move it 1 millimeter. Okay, it's going up, going down. Good. So now we'll home them maybe individually. We will home the X, and then home Y. And then this is where you want to be a little bit careful. We'll move the Z down bit by bit just to make sure that once it contacts the Z-axis limit switch, that there is still just a little bit of clearance between the bed and the nozzle. I'm just going to move it 1 millimeter at a time. See, it thinks it's at 0 right now, so I'll take a chance here, and I'll just home the Z. So you'll see that the nozzle has contacted the bed. So what I'll do, I'll move the Z up, move axis, Z, move it up 10. There we go. And we'll need to make sure that we tighten these down even further. There's going to be a lot of tension on these springs now as we get further and further down. They get hard to move. The instruction manual also goes over checking your belt tensions on both the X and Y axis, and has instructions for how to adjust the tension using this bracket here and the front bracket here. I need to move the Y forward. I'm just going to disable the steppers so that I can manually move the bed. If you are manually moving any of your axes, you want to do so slowly so that you're not causing any current to be generated from the steppers and fed back into the control box. You can blow your board. And you want to keep each corner as much as is reasonably possible equally tensioned. You don't want it to be really pinned down on one corner. All right, so let's try homing Y again. Good, and then home Z. Much better. So we've got about 1 millimeter of clearance there. I'll go back and disable the steppers. And I'll just move this from side to side and make sure that there's still clearance on that side, and as we move towards the back, so we have clearance all the way around. And then we'll go through our bed leveling routine using those shortcuts for the front corners, rear corners, and bring the bed up, slide a piece of paper underneath it to check for a little bit of clearance, and then we'll be ready to print. A couple interesting things to note. You want to make sure that the PTFE tube is securely pressed into the hot end. That can come loose in transit. They mentioned that in the manual as well. And the Titan extruder has a tension adjustment on the lever, which is very difficult to get to. You have to use one of these small Allen keys. There's a little screw in here, and that will adjust how much tension the lever places against the hobbed bolt or the gear that pulls the filament in. So I'll go through the bed leveling routine and we'll be back in a second. I've leveled the bed. It's important to note that you want to heat both the bed and the nozzle to operating temperature. There's a preheat PLA option in the menus there. Under prepare, I believe. I did notice that the settings from the factory are a little ambitious or a little too hot. So the bed preheat PLA is 80 degrees Celsius. I don't know anybody that prints PLA with a bed that hot. That's in like ABS territory. Regardless, I let it do preheat PLA. I let it get up to temperature. It got up to 80 degrees Celsius in a hurry, maybe 45 seconds tops. Then we went through the leveling process using a sheet of printer paper, moved the nozzle to each corner, slide it underneath till there's just a little bit of drag, adjusting the distance between the bed and the nozzle using the screws at each corner. It has little quick commands in there to move it to each corner after you've done an auto home. And now we've got it perfectly level, and this bed is level. It's level all the way across. I checked through the center. So there's no warping to speak of, which is fantastic. One thing that I did skip over during the assembly, and I've checked it just now, is you want to make sure that the wheels on the uprights have the same kind of tension as the wheels on the bed did when we first assembled the printer. You want to make sure that as you move each of these, it's actually securely contacting the V-groove. And in this case, because we have a single Z lead screw, you'll actually see the 2020 here flex up and down a little bit as you turn these wheels, because there's nothing supporting this side. There is a eccentric nut on this inner wheel and this inner wheel where you can tighten them against the groove here to increase the tension if need be, but these ones are all perfect. You want to do the same thing with the hot end, make sure it's not wiggly, make sure that each of these wheels, when you move it independently, moves the entire unit along the extrusion. But those are all fine for us. We wanted to do a test print today, and unfortunately there is no spool holder. I kind of find that hard to believe, but apparently there is one on the SD card. I'm not exactly sure how you're supposed to mount a spool of filament to do the print for the spool holder if you don't have any other printers. Luckily for me, that's not a problem, obviously, but for some people that may require a little bit of MacGyvering. You may need to have some little holder or string it up by some thread or something to have your spool there to unwind, or manually feed it in. But you can get creative, I guess, with that. I would really like to see them include a spool holder in the kit. It's really the only piece missing from here. There, it's finally cooled down. So quick pros and cons at first glance with the TEVO Tornado. Granted, I haven't actually printed with it yet, but initial impressions, I really love the AC heated bed. That thing heats up in a hurry. The heat is extremely uniform and covers the entire build surface. I know some other printers, especially when you get into larger formats, the heater bed, the heating element doesn't actually cover the entire build surface of the bed. So that's a definite pro. The Titan extruder is a definite upgrade from the kind of standard extruder you would see on a model like this. There's a couple improvements I'd like to see on that. I would like to see a better large extruder gear. These are normally made of POM or Delrin. This looks to be like an injection molded ABS plastic. So I'd like to see something self-lubricating like Delrin there. I'd like to see a easier to access tension screw, maybe something with a thumb wheel, much like the wheels on the bed. You know, the genuine Titan extruder has a thumb wheel, at least on the Titan Aero combination. It has a metal thumb wheel that's easy to turn. You wouldn't need an Allen key to adjust the tension there. Not that you'll need to adjust the tension very often. On the top, I do like the non-slotted bearing that the Z-axis lead screw goes into. We'll have a picture of this up here. It seems like they've taken the time to make sure that everything is in line. There's nothing out of alignment here. So they don't need to add extra slop into the top to account for anything being out of alignment. You also don't end up with that kind of rattling noise from time to time if you have a print going forward and back quickly, especially doing infill and stuff. If these are slotted, that can end up kind of clanging back and forth. I would like to see a second lead screw. I think in a build volume of this size, having an X-axis that's 300 plus millimeters long, that you end up with a lot of kind of drag or torque on this end that can cause it to flex, much as I'm simply doing right now. I just for safety's sake, I guess, I would like to see a second lead screw there, and either have them mechanically connected to each other. They can run off of one motor or a second motor, as is typical. I do like all metal hardware. I mean, basically everything that connects pieces of the printer to other pieces of the printer are metal. T-brackets, this top bracket, obviously everything on the X-axis gantry. I do like the color combination. That's just a personal thing, I guess. I also like that the box is a little bit smaller. You know, it's kind of stouter, a little less length to it. However, I would like to see some more cable length, and preferably not this split loom kind of plastic tubing. I'd like to see something with a little more flexibility to it, much like the braided nylon type sleeves. And yes, definitely extra cable length. It seems like the limiting cable is this This is the Z-axis limit switch cable. It's all of 8 inches long or so. Everything else has plenty of slack in it. Obviously, as this moves up, we're going to need slack in those cables, but just a couple more inches would be nice. The side intake fan, I think it's a plus. I think that'll draw in cooler air rather than it being on the bottom. But all in all, I mean, so far I'm pretty impressed. It's hard to tell how it will print, so I'm curious to see how that turns out. They definitely need to include that spool holder, as I mentioned earlier. It just kind of makes sense that someone should be able to get started right out of the box without needing to either rely on other equipment or jimmy rig something up to get themselves started. So that's it for today, I guess. Join us next time when we do our first print on the TEVO Tornado. And remember to comment down below, let us know what else you'd like to see, and like and subscribe and ring the bell to get notified when we upload more content. Thanks for watching.